She didn't just knock a child to the floor. She looked down at that little girl and told her it was her own fault. The father didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He just stood there, calm as stone, and asked for one thing, an apology. So she slapped him. In front of a cafe full of witnesses. In front of his 6-year-old daughter. In front of the cameras she never noticed. What Ava Sterling didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was exactly who she had just put her hand on. And by the time she figured it out, it was already too late. If this story pulls you in, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. The cafe was called Linden and Company, and it sat on the corner of 5th and Brazos in downtown Austin, Texas. The kind of place that charged $11 for a cortado and played jazz so quiet you could almost convince yourself it was ambient noise. The front windows were floor-to-ceiling glass, and at 7:45 in the morning, the light came through them at an angle that turned everything golden. The pastry case, the pale wood tables, the steam rising off the espresso machine. It was the kind of beautiful that felt accidental, the kind that had nothing to do with anyone's effort. Nathan Cole noticed it the moment they walked in, the way the light caught Emma's hair and made it look almost copper instead of brown. He filed that away without thinking about it, the way he'd learned to file small things, quietly, in the back of his mind, where he kept everything he didn't want to lose. "Is this fancy?" Emma asked. She was holding his hand and looking around with the particular wide-eyed caution of a 6-year-old who has been told more than once to keep her voice down in nice places. "A little," Nathan said. "How fancy?" "Fancy enough that we use our inside voices?" "We're already inside." "Then we use our quieter inside voices." Emma considered this. "What did I do to get to come here?" Nathan looked down at her. She had a gap where her left front tooth used to be, and her sneakers had little stars on the sides that lit up when she walked, and she was wearing the purple jacket she refused to let him wash because washing it, she had explained with complete seriousness, would wash out the good luck. He didn't know what 6-year-olds understood about good luck, but he hadn't pushed it. "You learned to read your whole book by yourself," he said. "The whole thing, no help." Emma frowned. "It wasn't that long." "It was 14 pages. The pictures were big." "Emma." "Okay," she said. "It was an achievement." "It was an achievement." She nodded, satisfied with that, and turned back to studying the pastry case with the focused intensity she applied to most things she found interesting. Nathan watched her for a moment, then scanned the room out of habit. Exits, sight lines, the cluster of people near the counter, the woman by the window on her laptop, the 2 men in suits talking with their hands. He'd been doing it for so long that he no longer noticed he was doing it. It was just part of how he moved through spaces, automatic as breathing. He'd been out of the service for 3 years. Some things had faded. That hadn't. The line was short, 4 people ahead of them. Nathan picked up Emma and settled her against his hip because she'd asked him to, even though she was probably getting too old to be carried. Even though his left shoulder had a plate in it from a place he didn't talk about, and carrying her sometimes made it ache. He held her anyway. She rested her head against the side of his face and hummed something tuneless to herself. "Can I get the one with the swirls on top?" she asked. "That's a cinnamon roll." "Can I get it?" "We came for breakfast." "A cinnamon roll is breakfast." "A cinnamon roll is dessert that's ashamed of itself." Emma pulled back to look at him, frowning. "What does that mean?" "It means, yes, you can get the cinnamon roll." She went back to humming. They were third in line when the door opened behind them and the room shifted in that barely perceptible way that happens sometimes when someone walks in and takes up more space than their actual body requires. Nathan felt it before he turned around. Some change in the air current, some unconscious recalibration from the people nearby. He turned because he always turned. The woman who'd walked in was maybe 30, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a white silk blouse, dark trousers, heels that had no business being worn before 8 in the morning. She was on her phone, not holding it to her ear but staring at the screen and talking into it, the kind of phone call that requires the speaker to pace slightly, to gesture with their free hand, to radiate the low-grade urgency of someone whose problems are extremely important and whose time is extremely limited. She had 2 people with her. One was a man in a suit who was typing something on a tablet and trying to keep pace with her. The other was a large man in dark clothing whose job was clearly not note-taking. I don't care what Harmon told them, the woman was saying. Her voice was sharp, controlled, the voice of someone who'd trained herself out of whatever accent she'd started with. The deliverables don't shift because the committee changed its mind. That's not how contracts work. She moved through the cafe like she expected the space to accommodate her, which it did, because people tend to move out of the way of someone who's moving with that particular brand of confidence. Nathan watched her come toward the line, and he shifted Emma slightly on his hip, adjusting their position by maybe 8 inches to give her room. It wasn't enough. Whether she misjudged the distance or simply didn't register them as an obstacle, Nathan wasn't sure. What happened was this. The woman walked past the edge of the line, still looking at her phone, her free arm swinging forward, and her elbow connected with Emma's back hard enough to knock the little girl sideways. Emma didn't fall to the floor dramatically. She lurched, startled, grabbed at Nathan's shirt, and ended up half sliding down his hip before he caught her under the arms and steadied her. But she'd been surprised, and it had hurt. He could tell by the sharp intake of breath and the way her eyes went wide and then immediately wet. The woman stopped. Nathan set Emma down carefully and crouched to check her, one hand on each of her shoulders. "Hey, you okay?" Emma blinked. Her bottom lip was doing the thing it did when she was deciding whether or not to cry. "She hit me," she said, in the small voice that meant she was going to cry. "I know." Nathan straightened up. He turned to the woman and his voice was even, no edge in it. Just a statement of what needed to happen next. "She's 6. You want to make sure she's all right." It wasn't a question. It was the mildest possible version of what he could have said, and he meant it sincerely. The woman looked up from her phone. She looked at Nathan. She looked at Emma. She looked at Emma's purple jacket and her lit-up sneakers and her gap-toothed face with tears starting to form in the corners of her eyes. And something happened in the woman's expression. Some calculation ran fast and quiet behind her eyes. And what came out the other side was not concern or apology. "She stepped into my path," the woman said. Nathan blinked. "She's 6 years old, and she was standing in a line." "I didn't see her." "That's why I'm suggesting you apologize." "She should have been paying attention to where she was standing." The woman's tone was brisk, dismissive, the tone of someone closing a meeting they consider a waste of time. She had already started to turn back toward her phone. Emma made a small sound. Nathan looked down at her. She'd gotten her composure back the way kids that age sometimes do. Not crying, but her jaw was set and her eyes were bright, and she was staring at the woman with the particular expression children wear when an adult has done something that doesn't make sense to them. "She knocked me," Emma said clearly. The woman stopped, turned back, looked at Emma. "Excuse me?" "You knocked me," Emma said. "On accident, probably, but my back hurts." Nathan watched the woman's face. He'd seen a lot of faces in a lot of situations, and what he saw now was someone who was not accustomed to being corrected by anyone, let alone a first grader with light-up sneakers. The slight widening of the eyes, the way the jaw set, the recalibration from mildly annoyed to something sharper. "Your back hurts," the woman repeated. Her voice was flat and dry and not quite a question. "Yes," Emma said. "Maybe next time don't stand in places where people are walking." There it was. The whole cafe had gone quiet. It hadn't been loud to begin with. Jazz, espresso machine, murmured conversation. But whatever ambient noise existed had dropped out in the way ambient noise does when people collectively decide to pay attention. Nathan straightened to his full height. He was 6'2", which was not extraordinary, but he stood in a way that used all of it. He'd spent the last 3 years deliberately softening that particular quality. He'd learned after leaving the service that a certain kind of stillness in a large man reads as threatening to people who haven't earned reason to fear him. He'd practiced making himself smaller, in a social sense, more approachable. He did it now in front of his daughter every day because he wanted Emma to grow up with a father she wasn't scared of. He let that go now. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, and his voice was still even, still controlled, but there was something underneath it that hadn't been there before. Not anger exactly, but weight. "Apologize to my daughter." The woman, and Nathan still didn't know her name, didn't know anything about her, just that she had money and an attitude and the kind of schedule that she'd decided made her the most important person in any room she entered, looked at him. Full eye contact. No flinching. I don't take direction from men in Walmart jeans, she said. The person at the tablet stopped typing. The large man in dark clothing made a small movement, a shift in stance, almost imperceptible. Nathan heard someone behind him make a quiet sound. He didn't break eye contact with the woman. My jeans don't have anything to do with whether your elbow hit my daughter, he said. I'm a very busy person, she said, the way someone might say water is wet, as though it were a fact that explained everything. I don't have time for this. You have time for it, Nathan said, because we're not moving until it happens. Something changed in her face. The calculation again, the fast, quiet one. And this time what came out was something different. Not a decision to apologize, not a recognition that she'd caused harm to a child. What came out was a decision to go harder. I will have this cafe's management remove you, she said. And if you're this difficult in public, I have to wonder what kind of home environment produces a child who thinks it's appropriate to speak to adults the way she just spoke to me. The room went very still. Nathan felt Emma's hand find his, her small fingers wrapping around two of his. He looked down at her once. She was looking up at him, not scared, or not only scared, she was watching him the way she watched him when she was trying to learn something. He looked back at the woman. Don't, he said. Just that. One word. Still quiet. Something flashed across the woman's face, a flicker of something that might have been recognition that she'd crossed a line. It lasted maybe a third of a second. Then it was gone, replaced by the particular expression of someone who has decided that backing down is worse than being wrong. She was probably going to say something else. Nathan never found out what it was. Ms. Sterling. It was the large man in dark clothing. He'd stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between the woman and Nathan, but he was facing her, not Nathan. His voice was low, intended for her ears. Nathan heard it anyway. Ms. Sterling, the man said again, I need you to step back. Marcus, handle this. Ma'am. The man, Marcus, had gone to a kind of stillness that Nathan recognized, the particular quality of stillness that comes from training. With respect, step back. What are you? Please. Marcus's voice hadn't raised, but something in it had, some register of urgency that apparently communicated itself to the woman because she stopped. Then Marcus turned to Nathan, and Nathan watched the man's face do something he hadn't expected. Something moved through Marcus's expression. Recognition, yes, but not the mild recognition of someone who thinks they've seen a face before. This was the recognition of a soldier seeing another soldier, and the other soldier is someone whose name he knows, whose name is attached to things. Marcus's jaw tightened. He looked, for just a moment, like a man trying to decide how to handle the fact that he had made a very serious mistake on behalf of his employer. Sir, Marcus said. He said it the way Marcus might have said it on a base, not in a cafe. He said it the way it meant something. You don't have to, Nathan started. Sir, Marcus said again, and this time he straightened in a way that was almost involuntary, a reflex so deeply trained that even 3 years out it apparently didn't fully leave. I apologize on behalf of Marcus. Ava Sterling's voice had changed. What is happening? Marcus turned to her. I quit, he said. The word landed in the silence of the cafe like something physical. Excuse me? Effective immediately. He unclipped something from his belt, a communication device, company issue, and set it on the nearest table. His movements were deliberate, unhurried. I apologize for not doing so sooner. He looked at Nathan one more time. Something passed between them that didn't require words. The kind of exchange that happens between people who've existed in the same specific categories of experience. Marcus nodded, once. Then he walked to the door, opened it, and left. Ava Sterling stood in the middle of Linden and Cumberoo with her mouth open for exactly 3 seconds. Nathan counted, then her expression closed back up, and what replaced the shock was something harder and colder, and Nathan thought, more dangerous. She looked at him, and she said with a kind of quiet fury that had been very carefully sharpened, You have no idea who I am. I don't need to, Nathan said. You're going to regret this, she said. Whatever it is you do, wherever it is you work. I will make sure that today follows you. She paused, let the threat settle. And that little girl. Her eyes moved to Emma, and her voice dropped to something almost clinical. If you're raising her to be rude to strangers, you might find that the people responsible for determining whether children are in safe home environments tend to take these things seriously. Every sound in the cafe had stopped. The espresso machine, the jazz, everything. Nathan looked at the woman for a long moment. He thought about a lot of things in that moment. He thought about a hospital room 3 years ago and a conversation he'd had with a grief counselor about what Emma would need from him. He thought about all the things he'd trained himself not to be since coming home. Not the version of himself that had made decisions in impossible situations, not the version of himself that had authorized things he still didn't sleep well after. He'd worked very hard to become someone his daughter wasn't afraid of. He thought about Emma's hand in his, and then Ava Sterling reached out and slapped him across the face. It was not a slap thrown in a moment of uncontrolled emotion. It was the slap of someone who has made a decision. Open palm, right hand, the crack of it loud enough that several people gasped. Nathan didn't move. He absorbed it with the particular stillness of someone for whom physical pain registers in a completely different category than it might for most people. He looked at her. Emma made a sound, small, high, the sound of a child who has just witnessed something she doesn't have the framework to process. "Daddy," she said. He reached down without looking away from Ava Sterling and found Emma's head, put his hand gently on her hair. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Stay right there." He could see in his peripheral vision that 3 people at nearby tables had their phones up. He noted this as a fact, the way he'd been trained to note facts. He looked at Ava Sterling, who was breathing hard, who was watching him with something in her eyes that might have been the very beginning of the realization that she had made an error. "You just assaulted me," Nathan said, "in front of 24 witnesses and whatever they're recording. My daughter saw it." He paused. "You need to leave now, or we're going to have a very different conversation." Ava Sterling looked around the cafe for the first time. Really looked. At the phones, at the faces, at the man behind the counter who had quietly picked up a landline telephone. Her face did something complicated. She looked back at Nathan. She looked at Emma. She looked, Nathan thought, like someone who had just fallen from a very great height and had not yet hit the ground, but was beginning to understand that the landing was unavoidable. She said nothing. She turned and walked to the door, her tablet-carrying associate scrambling to follow her. The door swung closed. For 3 seconds, the cafe was silent. Then someone started talking, and then someone else did. And the noise came back in a wave, and Emma tugged on Nathan's hand. "Daddy." He crouched down to her level. She looked at him with her gap-toothed face and her wide, serious eyes, and she put one small hand on the cheek the woman had slapped. "It didn't hurt you?" she asked. "No," he said, which was not quite a lie, and not quite the truth. "It didn't hurt me." Emma studied his face for a moment with the particular intensity of someone who is deciding whether to believe you. "She was mean," Emma said. "Yeah," Nathan said. "She was." Why? Nathan thought about it. He didn't believe in giving Emma simple answers to complicated questions, and this was a complicated question. He'd learned, in 6 years of raising her, that she could tell when he was being patronizing, and she didn't like it, and honestly, he didn't blame her. "I don't know," he said finally. "I think she forgot, for a while, that the way you treat people says more about you than it does about them." Emma thought about this. She forgot that. Some people do. Will she remember? Nathan looked at the door where Ava Sterling had walked out. He thought about Marcus's face, about the way a man who'd made his living protecting someone had walked away from that job in under 60 seconds. "I don't know," he said. It was honest, at least. The man behind the counter cleared his throat gently. "Sir, can I get you both something on the house?" Nathan straightened up. He looked at the man, mid-40s, flour on his apron, the expression of someone who had witnessed something they weren't sure what to do with. Nathan recognized the impulse behind the offer. "That's kind of you," he said, "but you don't have to." "No," the man agreed. "I don't." He was already pulling out a plate. "Does she still want the cinnamon roll?" Nathan looked at Emma. Emma looked at the pastry case. Yes, please, she said, with the careful politeness she only deployed when she was simultaneously upset and trying to seem fine. Nathan watched her. He watched the careful way she held herself together, the jaw set the same way it had been when she'd told Ava Sterling that her back hurt. 6 years old and already practicing composure, already learning how to be in a room after something bad had happened in it. He thought, I'm not doing this right if she has to practice that. He took her hand. Hey, he said. She looked up at him. You did good, he said. Earlier, when you told her what happened, that took guts. Emma's chin did a small wobble, then it steadied. I didn't like her, she said. You don't have to. Are you in trouble? No, Nathan said. I don't think I am. What he didn't say, what he would only understand later, when the videos started circulating and the phone calls started coming, was that trouble in this particular situation was headed in a very different direction than his. What he knew right now was that his daughter's cinnamon roll was being plated, that the morning light was still coming through the windows at an angle that caught her hair, and that the man who'd been standing behind them in line, a heavy-set guy in a UT Austin cap, who'd witnessed the whole thing from 3 feet away, was now looking at Nathan with the expression of someone who wants to say something but isn't sure if it's the right moment. Hey, the man said finally. Nathan looked at him. Good for you, the man said. It wasn't a great thing to say. It wasn't particularly eloquent or meaningful. The man seemed to realize this immediately after saying it and looked slightly embarrassed. But he'd said it, which was something. Nathan nodded at him. He sat down at the table nearest the window and pulled a chair close so Emma could sit beside him rather than across from him. She climbed into it and accepted the cinnamon roll when it arrived with a seriousness that suggested she was deploying the eating of it as a form of processing. Nathan wrapped both hands around a coffee mug he hadn't ordered, but that had appeared in front of him anyway. He looked out the window. The Austin morning was doing its thing out there, traffic building up on 5th Street, a couple of pigeons doing their ungainly sidewalk shuffle, a woman walking a dog so enormous it looked less like a pet and more like something she was accompanying. The world, in other words, continuing without particular concern for what had just happened inside Linden and Comerdu. Nathan had learned long before this morning that the world does that. He watched his daughter eat her cinnamon roll. She had a smear of icing on the side of her nose already, and hadn't noticed, or had noticed, and didn't care. She was looking out the same window he was, watching the enormous dog. Daddy, she said. Yeah. Can we get a dog? He looked at her. He looked at the icing on her nose. Finish your roll, he said. She went back to eating. Nathan drank his coffee. Somewhere across the city, Ava Sterling was getting into a car, and her phone was already ringing, and she was about to discover how many people had filmed what happened in that cafe and how fast things move when they start moving. But Nathan didn't know that yet. He knew his daughter's sneakers were lighting up under the table when she kicked her feet idly, the way she did when she was content. He knew the coffee was better than he'd expected. He knew that the light through the window was still gold and still catching her hair, and that he'd filed it away, the way he always did, in the back of his mind where he kept everything he didn't want to lose. He kept it. The cinnamon roll was gone by the time Nathan's phone started. Not dramatically, not a flood of notifications all at once. Just a single buzz, then another a few minutes later, then a third. He ignored the first two because he was watching Emma try to get the last of the icing off the plate with her finger, which she was doing with the focused determination of someone completing an important task. He checked the third because it was from a number he recognized, and that number shouldn't have had any reason to contact him on a Tuesday morning in October. The text read, "You need to call me. Now would be good." The number belonged to a man named Reeves. Daniel Reeves, who currently worked a desk job at a consulting firm in Virginia, who Nathan hadn't spoken to in 4 months, who had no way of knowing that Nathan was sitting in a cafe on 5th Street with icing on his coffee mug and a bruise forming slowly on the left side of his face. Nathan looked at the message for a moment. Then he looked at Emma, who had given up on the plate and was now pressing her finger against one of the stars on her sneakers to make it light up. "Give me 1 minute," he said. She didn't look up. "Okay." He stepped outside. The Austin morning had warmed up while they'd been inside. The kind of October warmth that Texas does, like it's making a point about itself. He called Reeves. It rang once. "Tell me you're not the guy in the video," Reeves said. Nathan paused. "What video?" "The one that's been shared 4,000 times in the last hour. Man in a blue Henley, little girl in a purple jacket. A woman who I'm told is Ava Sterling, as in Sterling Aerospace, slaps him across the face in a cafe and then makes a comment about CPS. Nathan turned and looked back through the window at Emma, still pressing the stars on her sneakers. "That would be me," he said. There was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds. "Nathan, I'm aware." "She threatened Emma." "I know what she said. She put her hands on you." "Reeves, what do you need?" Another pause, and Nathan could hear the man on the other end recalibrating, switching from the version of himself that was a former staff sergeant who had opinions about what should happen to people who threatened children, to the version of himself that was currently employed and had a mortgage. "I need you to know that this is moving fast. Whatever you're planning to do about it, you should probably figure that out soon, because the window where you control the narrative is not going to stay open long." "I'm not planning to do anything about it," Nathan said. "Nathan, I'm going to take my daughter home, and I'm going to call a lawyer, and I'm going to let whatever happens happen." He looked at his own reflection in the cafe window. The left side of his face looked normal. The bruise was the kind that takes time to show. "She assaulted me in front of witnesses. There are apparently videos. I don't need to do anything." "Sterling Aerospace has a government contract worth about $4 billion, Reeves said. "And Marcus Webb just quit on her in the middle of a coffee shop." Nathan went still. "You know Marcus." "Everybody knows Marcus. He was 1st Battalion before he went private." Reeves paused. "He knew who you were the second he saw you. He quit on principle, which tells you something about where his head is." Nathan thought about the way Marcus had straightened, the word "sir," delivered like something returned to its proper place after being set down in the wrong spot. "I'm not looking for this to become a thing," Nathan said. "It's already a thing," Reeves said, not unkindly. "I just wanted you to know that before you walked out into it unprepared. You know how I feel about unprepared." "I know how you feel about unprepared." "Good." A beat. "How's Emma?" Nathan looked through the glass at his daughter, who had abandoned the sneakers and was now watching the enormous dog across the street with undisguised longing. "She's okay," he said. She held herself together. "She's 6. She's tougher than that." "She's 6 and she's tough," Reeves amended. "Take her home. Call your lawyer." A pause. "And Nathan, don't minimize this when you talk to people about it. She threatened to call CPS on your kid. Don't let anybody tell you that's a minor thing." Nathan said he wouldn't. He hung up. He stood on the sidewalk for another moment, watching traffic move down 5th Street. Somewhere out there, a video of him getting slapped was making its way across the internet with a speed that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the particular hunger people have for watching powerful people behave badly. He went back inside and got Emma. The drive home took 12 minutes. Emma spent 11 of them asking questions about the dog she'd seen outside the cafe, what kind it was, how much it weighed, whether dogs that big needed special food, and one of them in silence, staring out the window with a particular expression that Nathan had learned meant she was processing something she hadn't figured out how to ask yet. It came, as it usually did, in the form of an apparent non sequitur. "Did that lady do something wrong?" Emma asked. "Yeah," Nathan said. "She did." "More than one thing?" He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was watching the back of his head. "More than one thing," he agreed. Emma nodded slowly, working through some internal framework. "Is she going to have to say sorry?" Nathan thought about 4,000 shares. He thought about Reeves's voice and Marcus's face and the man behind the counter with flour on his apron, already reaching for a telephone. "I think so," he said. "Eventually." Emma seemed to find this adequate. She went back to watching out the window. A moment later, she said, with the casualness of someone reporting a weather forecast, "I wasn't going to cry." "I know. I almost did." "That's okay." "I didn't want to." "Also okay." She was quiet for a moment, then, "You didn't cry either." "No." "Were you sad?" Nathan thought about this honestly, the way he tried to be honest with her about things that deserved honest answers. Not sad, he said. He found the right word, angry. But I didn't want to show her that. Why not? Because sometimes the best thing you can do when someone wants to make you feel small is not give them the satisfaction of seeing it worked. The light ahead turned red. Nathan stopped. Emma was quiet for a moment, her face doing that particular thing it did when she was deciding whether something he'd said made sense to her. She was trying to make you feel small, Emma asked. Yeah. She's not very good at it, Emma said. You're not small. Nathan looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was completely serious, stating a fact, and there was something so simple and certain in the way she said it that he had to look back at the road before she noticed his face doing something he didn't want to explain. No, he said. I'm not. The light turned green. The apartment was what it was. 2 bedrooms, 2nd floor, a small balcony that got afternoon sun and was home to 3 container plants in varying states of survival. Nathan had chosen it because the elementary school was 8 minutes away, and the landlord didn't mind noise, and he'd been putting off the question of whether to find something bigger because finding something bigger required making a decision about the future that he wasn't ready to make. He put Emma in front of the TV with her library book and a glass of juice, and then he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and called a lawyer he'd used once before, a woman named Carol Stanhope, who practiced in Austin and had handled a property dispute for him 2 years ago, and who he'd kept in his contacts for reasons he hadn't been fully able to articulate at the time. Nathan Cole, she said when she picked up. Her voice had that particular quality of controlled amusement that he'd noticed in their previous dealings, the voice of someone who finds most things at least mildly interesting. I've been watching the news this morning. Then you know why I'm calling. I know why you're calling. I've also pulled up your file, which means I already know a few things about you that are going to be relevant here. She paused. How's your face? Fine. People are saying Ava Sterling slapped you hard enough to be heard across a full cafe. People are not wrong. Are you hurt? No. Are you legally hurt? Nathan considered this. I don't know. That's partly why I'm calling. Carol Stanhope made a sound that might have been a laugh. Okay, here's where we are. You have, at minimum, a clear-cut assault case. She made physical contact, there are witnesses, and there's apparently video documentation. The threat against Emma is more complicated, but it's not nothing, especially delivered in public with that many people present. She paused. What do you want to do? I want to protect Emma, Nathan said. Whatever comes out of this, I don't want her dragged into something. Emma won't be the story, Carol said. You're going to be the story. Or more accurately, Ava Sterling's behavior is going to be the story, and you're going to be the person it happened to. Another pause, the kind that meant she was about to say something important. Nathan, I need to know. And I'm asking because it's going to come up, so I need to be ahead of it. How much of your service record is public? He'd been waiting for this question. Enough, he said. Not everything. Enough to be relevant here? He thought about how to answer this. I was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, he said. That's public. Anything after that it gets complicated. Carol was quiet for a moment. Complicated how? Complicated in the way that things get complicated when the operations they're attached to are still classified, Nathan said. I'm not going to be able to give you specifics. I don't need specifics, Carol said. I need to know if anything in your record could be used to make you look dangerous. Because that's the play, Nathan. That's what they're going to try. They're going to look at whatever they can find and try to build a story about an unstable veteran who made a scene in a cafe and has now decided to make trouble for a successful businesswoman. Let them look, Nathan said. You're sure? What they're going to find is a clean record, honorable discharge, and 3 years of raising my daughter without incident. He paused. What they're going to find is a man who stood still when a woman slapped him in front of his kid. Carol was quiet again. Longer this time. Okay, she said. Okay. Then here's what we do. Dat. Across the city, in the back seat of a black SUV headed toward the Sterling Aerospace corporate offices on the north side of Austin, Ava Sterling sat with her phone in both hands and said nothing for approximately 6 minutes, while her head of communications, a man named Patrick Dole, talked. She was hearing about 40% of what he was saying. The rest of her attention was occupied by the replay of the last 90 minutes, which her mind was running on a loop with the irritating insistence of something she couldn't locate a switch for. The cafe. The child in the purple jacket, the man who hadn't moved when she slapped him, just absorbed it and looked at her, which had been somehow more unsettling than if he'd reacted. Marcus walking out. I quit. 2 words. Flat, unhurried, like he'd been thinking about them for a while and the morning had just provided the occasion. She'd worked with Marcus Webb for 2 years. She'd trusted him with her physical safety, which meant she'd trusted him with her life in the most literal sense, and she'd paid him accordingly. And he had walked out of a cafe over a domestic incident with a stranger that had lasted less than 10 minutes. The video is the problem, Patrick was saying. It's clean, the audio is clear, the slap is clearly visible from 2 angles. We can't dispute the timeline, we can't dispute what was said, and we can't— I know what we can't do, Ava said. Patrick stopped. Tell me what we can do, she said. Patrick was 34 and had been in crisis communications for 8 years, which meant he had developed the specific skill set of a man who regularly had to deliver bad news to people who didn't want to hear it. He looked at Ava Sterling now with the controlled expression of someone choosing his words carefully. We can get ahead of it with a statement, he said. Something that acknowledges the incident, expresses genuine regret, focuses on, I'm not releasing a statement. Ava, I said I'm not releasing a statement. She looked out the window. The Austin skyline was doing its thing in the morning light, all glass and construction cranes. I didn't do anything that requires a public apology to strangers on the internet. Patrick was quiet for a moment. The man in the video, he said carefully, is being identified. By who? By a lot of people, very quickly. He hesitated. His name is Nathan Cole. He's a veteran, decorated from what I can find. I don't care who he is, Ava said. Whatever he did in the military is not relevant to— Ava, Patrick's voice had shifted. He has a Distinguished Service Cross. He lost his wife 3 years ago. He's been raising his daughter alone since she was 3. He let that sit. That's the narrative that's being built right now by every news outlet that's picked this up. That's who you slapped in a cafe. The SUV stopped at a light. Ava looked at her phone screen, where 3 different news alerts had appeared in the last 10 minutes. She closed the notifications without reading them. Find out who he is? She said. Not the military record, the actual situation. What does he do for work? Who does he know? What is he— She stopped herself. Patrick was looking at her with an expression she didn't fully like. What are you looking for? He asked. I'm looking for context, she said. He's a single father, Patrick said. That's the context. His daughter was 6 years old and you— He stopped. Choose your next word carefully, Ava said quietly. Patrick chose to say nothing instead. He looked back at his tablet. Outside the window, Austin went past. Ava Sterling sat with her hands in her lap and did not look at her phone and did not think about the way the little girl had said you knocked me with her chin up and her back straight, correcting an adult twice her size like she'd been taught to say the truth even when it was inconvenient. She did not think about this for the rest of the drive. She mostly succeeded. By noon, Nathan had spoken to Carol twice more, handled 3 calls from journalists he hadn't agreed to speak to, and explained to Emma 4 times, in 4 different ways, because Emma believed in thorough understanding, why he wasn't turning on the TV right now. He'd also made grilled cheese for lunch, which he'd burned slightly on one side because he was on the phone when it needed to be flipped, and Emma had eaten it anyway without comment, which was its own kind of grace. At 12:47, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer it. He'd been letting unrecognized numbers go to voicemail all morning. But something, the particular gut instinct that he'd long since stopped trying to rationalize, made him pick it up. Mr. Cole, said the voice on the other end. It was an older man's voice, measured, the kind of voice that had spent decades being the most controlled in the room. My name is Richard Calloway. I'm the Deputy Director of Defense Contract Oversight for the Department of Defense. A pause. I think we need to talk. Nathan sat down on the couch. Emma was in her room. He could hear her talking to herself the way she did when she was playing. All right, Nathan said. I want to be clear, Calloway said, that I'm calling in a personal capacity. This is not an official contact. It's one citizen to another, and anything I say to you shouldn't be characterized as official government communication. Understood. I watched the video this morning, Calloway said. Both of them. A pause. I also know who you are, Mr. Cole. I was briefed on your unit's operations well, I know who you are, and I know what you did over there, and I know you've never sought anything for it. Another pause, longer. I watched a woman put her hand across your face in front of your child, and then threaten that child, and I wanted to call you directly and tell you that you're not alone in this. Nathan was quiet for a moment. I appreciate that, he said. I do. But I'm also wondering if there's something more specific that prompted you to call. The pause this time had a different quality. The pause of a man who is deciding how honest to be. I have some professional concerns about Ms. Sterling's judgment, Calloway said finally. Concerns that have been building for some time. What happened this morning, the decisions she made, the way she escalated, the way she handled the public situation. These are not the decisions of someone I have confidence in as the head of a company holding significant defense contracts. That's a decision for your office to make, Nathan said carefully. It is, Calloway agreed. And I want you to know that your legal situation, whatever you decide to pursue, will not exist in a vacuum. There are people watching, people who've been watching. He paused once more. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking you to understand that when you walk into whatever comes next, you're not walking alone. Nathan sat with that for a moment. Through Emma's door, he could hear her giving what appeared to be a detailed speech to her stuffed animals about something, her voice rising and falling with the emphasis of someone who has important points to make. Mr. Calloway, Nathan said, I'm going to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Is she dangerous? To my daughter? Those things she said? No, Calloway said, and his voice had changed, gone flatter and more certain. She's not going to touch your daughter. I can promise you that much without overstepping anything. A beat. She said it to hurt you. It was a threat made in anger by someone who was losing a situation and wanted to regain control. It won't go anywhere. Nathan let out a breath he hadn't fully realized he'd been holding. Okay, he said. Okay, Calloway agreed. They talked for another 4 minutes. Logistics, careful language, nothing official. When they hung up, Nathan sat on the couch and looked at the ceiling for a while. The apartment was quiet except for Emma's muffled voice through the door, still apparently in the middle of her address to the stuffed animals. He got up and knocked on her door. Come in, she said, with the dignity of someone who has a busy schedule. He opened it. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed with 4 stuffed animals arranged in a semicircle in front of her, including the bear he'd had since he was a kid and had given her when she was 2, which had one eye missing from an incident she'd been very sorry about but couldn't entirely explain. What are you doing? He asked. Having a meeting, she said. About what? She considered whether to tell him. About getting a dog, she said. I'm trying to figure out the logistics. He sat down on the edge of her bed. She scooted over to make room, which she didn't need to do but did anyway, the way she'd started doing recently. Making room, adjusting, accounting for other people's presence. He noticed things like that, filed them away. How's the meeting going? He asked. Good, she said. Bear is against it because he's scared of dogs, but the others are for it. Bear's been around longer. His opinion might carry more weight. Emma considered this with her head tilted. Or it means he's stuck in his ways, she said. Nathan looked at his daughter. She looked back at him with the straightforward directness she'd had since she was old enough to make eye contact, the same directness that had made her stand up in a cafe and tell a grown woman, twice, what had actually happened. Dad, she said. Yeah. Are things okay? He thought about Richard Calloway's voice, about Carol Stanhope running numbers, about 4,000 shares and Marcus Webb walking through a door, about the weight of the things set in motion that morning that would keep moving now, whether he pushed them or not. Things are going to be okay, he said, which wasn't the same thing, and Emma was smart enough that he wasn't sure she didn't know the difference. But she looked at him for a moment, checking him the way she did, and then she nodded and turned back to her meeting. "Bear," she said to the one-eyed stuffed animal, "I hear your concerns, but we need to vote." Nathan stayed on the edge of the bed and watched his daughter run her meeting, and outside the apartment window, the Austin afternoon was doing its slow burn toward evening, and somewhere across the city, things were already moving in directions that neither of them could fully see yet. Bear lost the vote 3-1, which Emma announced with the gravity of someone delivering a verdict, and then immediately softened by telling Bear that his concerns had been heard and that they would develop a proper introduction protocol when the time came. Nathan watched her do this and thought, not for the first time, that she was going to be better at managing people than he had ever been. He made dinner. Pasta, the simple kind, the kind Emma would actually eat without negotiating. He stood at the stove and watched the water and kept his phone face down on the counter and gave himself the hour before bedtime to just be in the apartment, in the ordinary rhythm of it, because he knew that tomorrow the ordinary rhythm would be harder to find. He was right about that. The call from Carol came at 7:43 the next morning, while Emma was eating cereal and Nathan was on his second cup of coffee, and the apartment still had that quiet quality of early light and nothing yet required. "Turn on the news," Carol said without preamble. Emma's, "Your phone, earbuds, now." He put one earbud in and pulled up the local Austin affiliate. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Sterling Aerospace CEO faces assault allegation. Defense contract under review." The anchor, a woman in a blue blazer who was working very hard to maintain journalistic neutrality, was describing the contents of the cafe videos with the careful language of someone who had been briefed by a lawyer. Then they cut to a press conference. Richard Calloway stood at a podium in what appeared to be a government building. Marble behind him, flags on either side. And he was reading from a prepared statement in the measured cadence of someone who had chosen every word with the precision of a man who understood that precision mattered. He was not, he said carefully, in a position to comment on ongoing legal matters. What he could say was that the Department of Defense's contract oversight process was continuous, active, and responsive to all relevant information about the conduct and judgment of the principals holding government contracts. He could say that a review had been initiated. He could say that the standards expected of DoD contractors were not limited to technical performance, but extended to the professional conduct and public integrity of their leadership. He said all of this without once mentioning Ava Sterling's name. He didn't need to. "He did it," Nathan said into the phone. "He did it carefully," Carol said. "But yes, he did it." A pause. "The contract review is real. It's not a suspension yet. He can't do that unilaterally. But initiating a review is not a small thing. It flags the relationship. It signals to every other government partner, every institutional investor, every board member that there are questions being asked." She paused again. "Nathan, her stock dropped 6% in the first hour of trading this morning." In the kitchen, Emma was telling her cereal something. Nathan couldn't hear what. She did this sometimes, narrated to inanimate objects, which he'd been told by her teacher was completely normal for her age, and which he found endlessly interesting. "What do we need to do?" he asked. "The Austin DA's office called me this morning," Carol said. "They've received witness statements. They want to talk to you." "When?" "Today, if you're willing. I'll be with you." A pause. "There's also been a call from the APD detective who caught the case. The video evidence is..." "Nathan, it's not ambiguous. The slap is visible. The threatening language toward Emma is audible. They're taking this seriously." "Okay," Nathan said. "Are you okay?" Carol asked, and there was something in the question that wasn't lawyerly, something that acknowledged the difference between the legal situation and the human one. "I'm fine," he said. "Emma's fine. We're just..." He watched his daughter tap her spoon 3 times on the rim of her bowl, which she did when she was thinking about something. Doing mourning. "All right," Carol said. "I'll send you the address, 2:00. He took Emma to school. He drove the 8 minutes in the comfortable routine of it, Emma in the back seat explaining a complicated social situation involving her friend Mia, and a disagreement about whose turn it was to name their imaginary horse. The horse's current name was Sparkle, which Emma found inadequate, and Mia disagreed, and the whole thing had apparently reached an impasse that required the teacher's intervention. "What name would you give it?" Nathan asked. Emma thought about it very seriously. "Something real," she said, "like Biscuit." "That's a good name." "Mia wants it to sound magical." "Can it be both?" Emma tilted her head, considering this as a genuine philosophical question. "Magical Biscuit?" she said. "There you go." Emma burst out laughing, the sudden full-body laugh that she'd had since she was a baby, and that Nathan had spent 6 years being silently grateful for. He pulled up to the school drop-off lane, and she climbed out, still laughing, turned back to wave at him, one of those fast, not-looking waves that kids do when they're already half somewhere else. And then she was through the doors and gone. He sat in the drop-off lane for a moment after she disappeared. Then he drove to meet his lawyer. The Austin Police Department's detective was a woman named Sandra Okafor, who was 41 and had the specific kind of face that is not unfriendly, but has also heard most stories and is not easily surprised by new ones. She shook Nathan's hand when Carol brought him in and offered him coffee from a machine in the corner, which he accepted because it was something to do with his hands. They sat across from each other at a table in a room that smelled like old carpet and printer ink. "Mr. Cole," Okafor said, "I want to go through what happened yesterday morning. In your own words, in whatever order makes sense. You don't need to follow the video." So Nathan talked. He talked the way he'd learned to talk in debriefs, ordered, specific, without editorializing, staying close to what he'd observed and what he'd heard rather than what he'd concluded. Okafor made notes. Carol sat beside him and said nothing, which meant Nathan was doing fine. When he finished, Okafor looked at her notes for a moment. "The comment about Emma," she said. "The CPS remark. I want to make sure I have the exact language." Nathan repeated it. Okafor wrote it down. "We have it on audio from 2 separate recordings," she said. "I want you to know that." She looked up. "The witnesses have been consistent. We have 8 statements, and they're consistent with each other and with the video." She paused. "Ms. Sterling's attorney has been in contact with our office." "What are they saying?" Carol asked. "That the incident was provoked, that Mr. Cole was aggressive." Okafor's expression didn't change exactly, but something in it settled, like a weight shifting. "That's a difficult argument to make when you're looking at the video, which shows a man who didn't raise his voice, didn't make a physical move toward anyone, and absorbed a physical strike without responding." "It's the argument they have," Carol said. "It's not a good one." Okafor looked back at Nathan. "I'm going to be straightforward with you. This is moving toward charges. The DA's office is involved because of the public nature of the incident and the identity of the individuals. Not yours specifically, but the contractor relationship brings federal awareness, which accelerates the timeline." She folded her hands. "Are you prepared for this to be a public process?" "I don't have a choice," Nathan said. "You have some choices," Okafor said. "You could pursue a civil resolution. Her attorneys will offer one." "I'm not interested in her money," Nathan said. Okafor studied him for a moment. Not skeptically. More like someone checking the structural integrity of something before trusting it. "What are you interested in?" she asked. Nathan thought about Emma's hand on the cheek that had been slapped. The way she'd asked, "It didn't hurt you?" "Accountability," he said, "for what she said about Emma specifically. That's what I care about." Okafor nodded. She looked like she believed him, which was its own kind of relief. "All right," she said, "we'll be in touch." By the time Nathan picked Emma up from school at 3:15, the story had done the thing that stories do when they find enough wind. It had gotten bigger than the original event. It was no longer just a video of a woman slapping a man in a cafe. It was a developing story with named sources and attributed quotes and background panels about Sterling Aerospace and its government contracts and the career of its CEO. Several veterans organizations had issued statements. A couple of legislators had made comments. Social media was, by all accounts, Nathan was choosing not to look at directly, extremely active. Carol had texted him a summary, which she'd labeled, "For informational purposes only. Do not engage with any of it directly," and which he read once and then put his phone down. He was at the school pickup lane, engine running, when his phone rang. Unknown number again. He answered it. Mr. Cole. This voice was younger than Calloway's, with the particular clip of someone who speaks faster than they mean to because they're always handling three things at once. My name is James Whitfield. I'm on the board of Sterling Aerospace. A pause. I'm calling without the knowledge of our legal team, so I'd appreciate some discretion. Okay, Nathan said. I want you to know that the board convened an emergency meeting this morning. Ms. Sterling's conduct, the incident, and more specifically her response to the incident, has generated significant concern among our investors and our primary institutional partners. He paused. We're in a difficult position. I'm sorry to hear that, Nathan said, which was not entirely dishonest. I'm not calling to ask for anything, Whitfield said. I want to be clear about that. I'm calling because I think you deserve to know that the people around Ava Sterling are not defending what she did. Whatever she told you about her connections, whatever she implied about her ability to insulate herself from consequences, you should know that's not where we are. Nathan watched the school doors. A stream of small children was beginning to emerge, backpack weighted, energy restored by a day at school, and now releasing it into the drop-off lane with magnificent inefficiency. Mr. Whitfield, Nathan said, with respect, what do you want from this call? A pause. I suppose I wanted to apologize, on behalf of the people who are associated with her by circumstance. Another pause, shorter. And I wanted to know that Emma is okay. I have a daughter. She's 8. A beat. What she said about that little girl, there's no defense for it. I want you to know that people who were in a position to say so are saying so. But Nathan found Emma in the stream of children, purple jacket, one star on her sneaker lighting up with each step, backpack hanging off one shoulder, the way he'd told her not to carry it approximately 40 times. She spotted his car, and her face did the thing it did, the uncomplicated brightness of it, like a light switched on. She's okay, Nathan said. She's good. I'm glad, Whitfield said, and he sounded like he meant it. Nathan hung up as Emma reached the car, yanked the back door open, and threw herself and her backpack inside with the controlled chaos of a child who has been sitting in a chair for 6 hours and is now free. Magical Biscuit, she announced. What? Mia agreed. The horse is now Magical Biscuit. She buckled her seatbelt with great authority. I told her it could be both magical and real. She said that's actually better, so we agreed. Good negotiating, Nathan said. I know. She looked out the window as he pulled out of the lane. What did you do today? Talk to some people? About the cafe lady? Yeah. Emma considered this. Is she in trouble? Nathan pulled onto the main road. Ahead of them, Austin's afternoon traffic was doing its slow choreography, brake lights and lane changes and the particular patience you either develop or don't. She's getting there, he said. Getting there, as it turned out, happened faster than Nathan had expected, and in a way he hadn't predicted. It happened the next morning. He was at the apartment, Emma at school, Carol's number on his screen with a call he'd just answered, and Carol's voice had a quality he hadn't heard in it before, a kind of controlled excitement, the excitement of a lawyer who is watching things go exactly the way lawyers hope things go and is professionally obligated not to gloat about it. They found her, Carol said. Who found who? A PD located Ava Sterling at the Sterling Aerospace offices this morning. They went in person with the warrant. A pause for effect, and Carol was not usually a pause for effect person. She was in the middle of a board meeting. Nathan sat down on the couch. They arrested her in front of the board, Carol said. Assault charges. The threatening language toward Emma was included as an aggravating element. She paused again. The board meeting was already in progress because of the contract review and the investor situation. So when the officers came in, she stopped. There were witnesses, Nathan said. About 12 of them, Carol said, including, I'm told, James Whitfield. Nathan looked at the wall across from him. There was a drawing Emma had done taped to it. A horse, he was pretty sure, though it was more abstract than representational. She'd put stars on its hooves. Is she going to be arraigned? He asked. This afternoon, most likely. She'll post bail. She has the resources. But the charges are formal, and they're on record. Carol's voice settled back into its usual register, the controlled amusement version. Her legal team is going to fight this. I want you prepared for that. This isn't over today. I know. But the arrest? Nathan, that happened, publicly, in front of the people who make decisions about her company and her career. A beat. Some things you can recover from, some things you can't. The people in that room watched their CEO get arrested for assaulting a single father and his 6-year-old daughter. That's going to live somewhere in every one of their minds every time they look at her from this point forward. Nathan thought about the cafe, about the stillness of the room after the slap, about the way it had felt to be standing in that silence with Emma's hand in his and the choice in front of him about what to do with his face, what to let show, what to keep down. He thought about Emma asking if he was sad and him saying no, just angry, which was true as far as it went. But there was another word underneath the anger that he hadn't given her, hadn't given anyone. Tired. He'd been tired. Tired of the kind of people who move through the world like the world owes them passage, who treat everyone around them as either useful or invisible. He'd spent years in situations that stripped everything down to what people actually were underneath the rank and the money and the posturing, and what he'd learned was that Ava Sterling was a type, not a unique specimen. The only thing unusual about yesterday morning was that she'd done it in public, to someone who happened to be standing next to enough cameras. He knew men like her. He'd served under 2 of them. He knew what it cost, in the long run, to be that kind of person. He knew that the bill always arrived eventually. "Nathan," Carol said, "you still there?" "I'm here." "How are you doing, actually?" He thought about it honestly. "I'm all right," he said. Emma had a horse naming dispute resolved yesterday. That felt significant. Carol laughed, which he hadn't expected. It was a real laugh, the kind that happens because something actually caught you off guard. "Okay," she said. "That's good. That's a good sign." The arraignment happened at 2 in the afternoon, which Nathan knew because Carol kept him updated by text, and which Emma didn't know because Nathan hadn't told her and wasn't going to until there was a reason to. He picked Emma up from school, drove to the park 3 blocks from their apartment, the one with the big oak trees and the slightly wobbly swings that the city had been promising to fix for 2 years, and pushed her on those slightly wobbly swings while the Austin afternoon settled into the particular golden quality it had when the temperature finally relented. Emma pumped her legs and went higher than she probably should have, and he let her, because some things you have to let slide. "Higher," she said. "You're already pretty high." "Higher!" He pushed her higher. She came back down and he caught the back of the swing briefly, felt the momentum of it, let it go. "Dad," she said, on the upswing. "Yeah," he said when she came back. "Did the cafe lady say sorry yet?" He pushed her. She went forward. "Not yet," he said when she returned. "Is she going to?" He caught the swing again, held it for just a second. "I don't know, Case," he said. "Maybe eventually." Emma twisted to look back at him, which made the swing rotate sideways in a way that made him instinctively put a hand out to stabilize it. She had her serious face on, the one that meant she was about to say something she'd been turning over for a while. "Do you want her to?" Emma asked. Nathan looked at his daughter. The afternoon light was in her hair again, that same angle, the same copper knot brown it turned in gold light. She had a scratch on her left knee from something that had happened at recess that she hadn't explained clearly, and her shoelace on the right sneaker was coming undone, and she was watching him with the complete attention of someone who was not going to be satisfied with a partial answer. "Yeah," he said. "I think I do." "Well, because it would mean she changed." He thought about it. "Because it would mean she understood," he said. "There's a difference. You can change what you do without understanding why you did it wrong. That doesn't really help anybody." He paused. "An apology that actually means something, that requires understanding." Emma thought about this for what felt like a long time. "Okay," she said finally. "You can push me again." He pushed her again. She went up into the gold afternoon, legs pumping, sneaker stars catching the light with each kick, and Nathan stood behind her and watched and felt the particular complicated fullness of a day that had been many things. A warrant, an arraignment, a board meeting interrupted, a contract flagged, a resume examined, a story told and retold by strangers on the internet, compressed now into this: a park, a wobbly swing, his daughter asking better questions than most adults he'd ever met. He was still there when his phone buzzed with Carol's text. She was arraigned, bail posted, charges on record. We're in this for the long game now, but today was a step. How's Emma? He typed back one-handed, watching Emma swing. She's good. We're at the park. Carol responded with something she'd probably never use in a professional context, and which made him smile slightly and put the phone back in his pocket. The swing slowed on its own, Emma's pumping getting lazy as she settled into the rhythm of just moving back and forth without trying to go higher. She let her head fall back, watching the sky through the oak leaves, watching light come through in pieces. "Dad," she said to the sky. "Yeah." "Bear changed his vote." Nathan frowned. "About the dog?" "He thought about it some more," Emma said. "He decided that just because something scares you doesn't mean it's not worth trying." Nathan stood behind the swing. He didn't say anything for a moment. "That's a good point," he said finally. "I know." She sat back up. "I told you Bear was smart." Bear's revised position on dogs became a minor recurring subject in the Cole household over the following week, which was the kind of thing that happens when a child latches onto a piece of logic they find satisfying. Emma invoked it twice during that period. Once when Nathan hesitated about letting her try the monkey bars at the taller playground, and once, more pointedly, when he admitted he'd been putting off a phone call he needed to make. She didn't say anything elaborate either time. She just looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has relevant information and is giving you the opportunity to apply it yourself. The phone call he'd been putting off was to his mother. He made it on a Thursday evening, after Emma was in bed, standing on the small balcony with his container plants that were doing fine, mostly, except for the basil, which had been declining since August in a way he hadn't been able to diagnose or reverse. His mother, Patricia Cole, lived in Knoxville and had a habit of knowing when something had happened before he told her, which she attributed to instinct, and he attributed to her reading 4 different news aggregators every morning. "I saw it Tuesday," she said, before he'd finished his first sentence. "I figured. I watched both videos." A pause. "I've watched them maybe 6 times. Mom, I'm allowed," she said. "Someone put their hand on my son's face in front of my granddaughter. I'm allowed to watch the video 6 times. Another pause, shorter. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "Is Emma?" "She's good. She's better than me, honestly. She spent the day after it happened running a vote among her stuffed animals about whether to get a dog." A silence, the kind that carries warmth in it. "That child," his mother said softly and completely. "Yeah." They talked for 40 minutes. His mother asked questions he answered honestly, and she gave opinions he mostly agreed with, and at one point she said something that he hadn't heard from anyone else, not Carol, not Reeves, not Calloway, which was, "I know you're handling this the right way. I just want to make sure you're letting yourself be angry somewhere because you're allowed to be, and you have a habit of compressing things." He thought about the word compressing. He thought about the plate in his shoulder and the grief counselor 3 years ago, and the specific technique he'd developed of putting things in a room in his mind and closing the door, which worked fine most of the time, and not fine during certain kinds of rain. "I know," he said. "Okay," she said, "as long as you know." The weeks that followed had a quality Nathan would describe later to Reeves as background noise turned loud. The charges against Ava Sterling moved through the early stages of a legal process that Carol explained in regular updates delivered with the precision of someone who was billing by the hour and wanted to make sure the work was visible. The contract review at the DoD expanded from a preliminary inquiry to a formal evaluation, which was a distinction that apparently mattered a great deal to people who worked in that world. Sterling Aerospace's stock, which had dropped 6% the morning after the incident, had stabilized but not recovered. 2 institutional investors had quietly reduced their positions. None of this was dramatic. It was the grinding, unglamorous machinery of consequence, which moves slowly and without the satisfying clarity of a single decisive moment. Ava Sterling did not comment publicly. Her legal team did in the form of carefully worded statements that Carol forwarded to Nathan with brief annotations. The statements used phrases like context not captured by the footage, and a difficult professional morning that escalated unexpectedly, and our client deeply regrets the distress caused to all parties. The phrase deeply regrets was doing significant work in that last sentence, stretching itself thin across a distance it wasn't designed to cover. They want to settle, Carol told him, on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the incident. She'd come to the apartment this time rather than meeting at her office, because Nathan had mentioned that mornings were easier, and she'd accommodated that without making anything of it, which he appreciated. She was sitting at his kitchen table with a coffee mug that had Emma's name on it in paint, which Emma had made at school the previous year, and which was technically Emma's, but which Nathan used constantly because it was the right size. They've been wanting to settle, Nathan said. They've gotten more specific, Carol said. There's a number. I told you I don't want... It's not a money offer, Carol said. It's a proposal, a structured one. She looked at him across the table. She's asking for a meeting, her, you. No lawyers in the room, though both legal teams would be present outside. She wants to... Carol checked her notes. Speak to you directly. Nathan looked at the table. Her idea or her lawyers, he asked. I don't know, Carol said. Honestly, it could be either. It could be strategic, a demonstration of remorse for the benefit of the legal process. Or it could be something more genuine, though I want to be careful about that because I have no way of knowing. She paused. What I can tell you is that her team has been less aggressive in the last week. The tone of the communications has changed. Changed how? Carol thought about it. More careful, she said. Not careful in a hostile way. Careful in the way people get when they've had time to sit with something they're ashamed of. Nathan looked at the mug with Emma's name on it. I'll think about it, he said. He thought about it for 4 days, which Emma spent largely unaware of the subterranean deliberation happening in the apartment, occupied instead with the horse-naming saga's newest development. Mia had decided Magical Biscuit should have a last name, which had introduced a new layer of complexity to the negotiation. The steady progress of her reading and the ongoing question of the dog, which Nathan had not said no to, but had also not said yes to, which Emma had accepted as a form of pending status that she intended to revisit regularly. On the third day, while Nathan was watching Emma do her homework at the kitchen table, she was writing sentences using vocabulary words, and one of the sentences was, "The dog was very brave when the thunder came," which he was approximately 80% sure was targeted. His phone rang with a number he recognized now. Marcus Webb. He stepped onto the balcony. I heard you're thinking about meeting with her, Marcus said, without greeting. Nathan looked at the basil, which was looking worse. Word gets around. I still have people inside her operation, Marcus said. Not in a nefarious way. I just know people. I know how it works. A pause. I want to tell you something, Marcus said, and I need you to understand that I'm not advocating for her. I'm not asking you to do anything specific. I just want to tell you something, and you can do whatever you want with it. All right, Nathan said. She's not sleeping, Marcus said. I mean that literally. There are people who've seen her, and she's not okay. The legal situation, the company, the public thing, all of that is real pressure, and I don't have sympathy for any of it, because she created it. But there's something else. He paused. The look she had when she walked out of that cafe. I've worked close protection for 7 years, Nathan. I've been in rooms with people going through real things. And that look, that was not a person who was okay with what she'd done. Nathan said nothing. I'm not saying forgive her, Marcus said. I'm not saying anything about that. I'm saying, the woman who slapped you in that cafe, I don't think she understood what she was doing in the moment, not the full weight of it. And I think she does now. A pause. That doesn't make it right. It's just, I wanted you to have that. Nathan looked at the Austin skyline, the edge of it visible over the neighboring rooftops. Why did you really quit? He asked. In the moment. In the cafe. Silence. Because I'd been thinking about it for a while, Marcus said. And because I recognized you and what she was doing to you, and I'd spent 2 years watching her do smaller versions of that to people with less ability to absorb it, and it stopped being something I could put in a box. A pause. And because she threatened a 6-year-old, and that was the line. Yeah, Nathan said. That was the line for me too. They were quiet for a moment, the comfortable silence of two people who've established enough shared context that silence doesn't require filling. The meeting, Marcus said. Whatever you decide, but you should decide it for yourself. Not for her, not for the case. For you. A pause. But I think if you go, you'll see something real. I can't promise what she says. I can't promise she handles it well. He stopped. You think she's changed, Nathan said. Marcus considered this. I think she's changing, he said. There's a difference. He told Carol yes on the fourth day. The meeting was arranged for a Saturday morning, which felt like an odd choice. The kind of detail that either meant nothing or meant that someone had decided the weekend would carry less formality, less armor. It was at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown Austin hotel, clean and anonymous, chosen by both legal teams as a space with no particular associations. Nathan dropped Emma at Reeves's house. Reeves had moved to Austin 2 years ago, which Nathan had not engineered but had not been unhappy about. And Emma referred to Reeves as your work friend in the specific tone she used when she hadn't quite decided what a person was yet. Reeves had 2 kids of his own, a boy of 8 and a girl of 4. And Emma's relationship with the 4-year-old involved a kind of patient mentorship that Nathan found quietly hilarious. How long will you be? Emma asked in the car. A few hours, Nathan said. Maybe less. Is it for the cafe lady thing? He glanced in the rear view. She was watching him with the alert casualness of someone who has been trying to read the temperature of the apartment for several days and has drawn accurate conclusions. Yeah, he said. Emma nodded slowly. Are you going to be okay? The question, in her voice, in that particular register of genuine concern that children have before they learn to disguise concern as something more sophisticated, it landed somewhere in his chest in a way he didn't immediately have a response to. Yeah, he said, I'm going to be okay. Okay, she said. And then after a moment, tell her what you told me, about understanding. He looked at her in the mirror. About how a real apology needs understanding, Emma said. Not just sorry. You told me that in the park. Tell her that. Nathan drove. Yeah, he said after a moment. Maybe I will. The conference room had water on the table, the generic kind in plastic bottles, and a window that looked out onto 6th Street where Saturday morning Austin was doing its slow, easy version of itself. Nathan arrived first. Carol was outside in the hallway. He'd asked to go in alone, which Carol had agreed to with the expression of a lawyer who disagrees with a decision but respects the client's right to make it. He was standing at the window when Ava Sterling came in. He heard the door, turned. She'd come in alone too. No Patrick Dole, no tablet-carrying associate. Just her, and she looked like herself but also not quite, the way people look when they're carrying something they can't put down. She was dressed simply, which he noticed because the last time he'd seen her, she'd been armored in the specific way expensive clothes armor people. This was not that. Dark jeans, a gray blouse, no heels. Her hair pulled back without particular attention. She stopped when she saw him. He thought she might say something immediately. She didn't. She stood near the door for a moment, like someone who had prepared for 100 versions of this, and was now discovering that none of them had been quite accurate. Mr. Cole, she said finally. You can call me Nathan, he said. He didn't know why he said that. It seemed right. She nodded. Ava, she said. There was a table between them with 6 chairs. Neither of them sat down. He waited because he'd learned a long time ago that the person who can hold silence longest in a room usually ends up understanding the room better. I don't know where to start, she said. It came out flat, not practiced, like she'd had a speech and it had abandoned her. Wherever makes sense, Nathan said. She looked at him. He'd braced himself, coming in here, for the possibility that this would be a performance, the controlled, lawyer-approved display of contrition that people do when they need to demonstrate remorse for legal purposes. He was watching her face for the markers of that, the things that don't line up when someone's saying one thing and meaning another. He didn't find them. What he found instead was a person who looked genuinely exhausted and genuinely uncomfortable in their own skin, which was its own kind of evidence. I don't have an explanation, she said. I've spent 3 weeks looking for one because I'm someone who... She stopped herself. I'm someone who has always had an explanation for everything. I'm good at explaining things. It's actually a skill I get complimented on. Her mouth did something rueful. I don't have one for what I did in that cafe. Okay, Nathan said. I knocked your daughter down, Ava said. And instead of stopping, instead of making sure she was okay, She stopped again. I made it worse. Every time I opened my mouth, I made it worse. And part of me knew that in the moment, and I kept going anyway because I was... She shook her head. Because I was losing the situation and I don't handle that well. Losing the situation, Nathan said. Losing control of what was happening, she said. I walk into rooms and I control what's in them. That's how I've been for a long time. And you stood there and wouldn't react the way I expected. And your daughter wouldn't react the way I expected. She stopped, took a breath that she didn't try to hide. I slapped you, in front of her. She looked at him directly. I'm not going to dress that up in any language. I slapped you, and she watched it, and I said what I said about her, and those are things I can't undo. Nathan looked at her. My daughter asked me, he said, on the way here, to tell you something. Ava's expression shifted slightly. She said to tell you that a real apology needs understanding, not just the word sorry. He paused. She's 6. She figured that out on her own. Ava's face did something complicated. Her jaw tightened the way jaws do when people are trying to keep their expression from moving somewhere they haven't decided they want to go. She's right, Ava said quietly. So, Nathan said, do you understand? A silence. Not the silence of someone buying time. The silence of someone actually looking at something they've been avoiding. I think I've been... Ava started, then stopped, started again. I think I've spent a long time mistaking the way people respond to power for the way they actually feel about me. I made people move, and I called that respect. I made people afraid to say no, and I called that authority. She paused. That little girl wasn't afraid of me. And the way you stood there, you weren't afraid either. And I didn't know what to do with that. I'd forgotten how to be in a room with people who weren't afraid of me. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. I think I've known for a long time that the way I treat people is wrong. I've just been very good at not holding still long enough to look at it directly. Nathan said nothing. He was listening to whether this was true. The way he'd learned to listen for truth in hard environments where the consequence of being wrong about someone's honesty was measured in things larger than money. It sounded true. It sounded like someone who had been forced by circumstance into a room with themselves and hadn't liked what was in there and was now trying to figure out what to do about it. I'm sorry, Ava said. I know that's inadequate. I know Emma will probably never know I said it, and that's appropriate. She shouldn't have to think about me at all. But I'm saying it to you directly because you were there and you deserve to hear it from me without lawyers translating it. She met his eyes. I'm sorry for what I did to her, and for what I did to you, and for what I said. Nathan held the words for a moment. He thought about what his mother had said about compressing things. He thought about the room in his mind with the closed door. He thought about Reeves saying, don't minimize it, and Carol saying some things you can recover from, and some things you can't, and Marcus saying she's changing, not changed. He thought about Emma on the swing, going higher than she probably should, the stars on her sneakers catching light. I hear you, he said, which was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was not the closing of an account. It was the only honest response he had, and he thought it was the right one. Ava nodded. She looked like someone who had prepared for worse and wasn't sure what to do with this. What happens now? She asked. With the case. That's between the lawyers, Nathan said. It's not something I control. I know. A pause. I'm not asking because of the case. I'm asking because... She stopped. I'm asking because I don't know what comes after something like this. I've been running from consequences my whole career. I've never had to actually stop and see what they were. Nathan thought about this. He thought about a version of himself years ago in a debrief room, accounting for a decision made in a fraction of a second that had consequences that were still attached to him and always would be. He thought about what the grief counselor had told him about the difference between carrying something and being defined by it. I can't tell you what comes next, he said. but I can tell you that looking at it directly is better than not." He paused. "The not looking is what costs you." Ava Sterling stood across the table from him and looked like someone standing at the top of a very steep set of stairs, which she'd realized she was going to have to go down whether or not she'd brought the right shoes. "Okay," she said. It was a small word. It didn't resolve anything, didn't fix anything, didn't close the distance between who she'd been in that cafe and whoever she was going to be on the other side of it. But it was real. And Nathan had spent enough time around people in difficult situations to know that real was where things actually had to start. He picked up one of the plastic water bottles from the table, set it back down without opening it. "My daughter's name is Emma," he said. "Since you've been trying not to think about her specifically, I thought you should know." He paused. "She's doing fine. She's negotiating a horse naming dispute with her best friend, and she's reading chapter books by herself, and she just convinced a stuffed bear to change his vote on an important issue." He looked at Ava. "She's fine, in case that matters to you." Ava Sterling looked at the table. Something moved through her face that she didn't manage to keep entirely contained. "It matters," she said. "Good," Nathan said. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair where he'd set it. He didn't say goodbye in any formal way, because this wasn't a formal meeting. It was a Saturday morning in a conference room with water and plastic bottles and a window overlooking a street that didn't know or care what was being said inside. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on it, turned back once. "She asked me," he said, "before I came here if I was going to be okay. She's 6. He looked at Ava Sterling, who was still standing at the table looking like someone who has just been handed something and isn't sure they deserve to hold it. Think about what kind of child asks a question like that. Think about what it takes to raise one." He paused. "And think about what it would have taken from you. In that cafe, 30 seconds, to see her." He left. Carol was in the hallway trying to look like she hadn't been standing 2 feet from the door. She fell into step beside him. "How was it?" she asked. "Real," Nathan said. "I think." "Is that good?" He considered. "It's something," he said. They walked toward the elevator. Behind them, in the conference room with the plastic water bottles and the window overlooking 6th Street, Ava Sterling was still standing at the table. He didn't look back to confirm this. He just knew it, the way you know certain things about certain people after you've been in a room with them long enough to see what they're actually made of. He pulled out his phone, texted Reeves. "On my way. How's Emma?" The reply came back in under a minute. "Currently explaining to my 4-year-old why Magical Biscuit is a valid horse name. Riveting stuff. Drive safe." Nathan stepped into the elevator. For the first time in 3 weeks, something in his chest that had been held at a specific tension released just slightly, the way a fist unclenches when you finally decide you're done holding something. He drove to pick up his daughter. The drive back to Reeves's house took 19 minutes, and Nathan spent most of them not thinking about the conference room, which was its own kind of thinking about it. The city moved past the windows the way it always did on Saturday mornings. Unhurried, domestic, people walking dogs and carrying coffee cups, and existing in the ordinary way that people exist when they don't know they're being observed. He stopped at a light on Lamar and watched a man trying to fold a stroller with one hand while holding a baby with the other, and the stroller was not cooperating. And the man had the specific expression of someone who has been awake since 4:30 and is running entirely on something that isn't quite patience, but is doing patience's job. Nathan watched him get the stroller folded on the 3rd attempt and felt the particular solidarity of recognizing a version of a thing he knew. The light changed. He drove. What Ava Sterling had said in that conference room, "I've been very good at not holding still long enough to look at it directly," stayed with him in the way that honest things sometimes stay. Not because they're comfortable, but because they land in a place that recognizes them. He'd known people like her, in the service and out of it, people who moved fast enough that their own reflection never quite caught up. He'd been a version of that himself, in the years before Emma, in the operational years when the movement was the point and stillness was a liability. He knew what it cost to stop. He knew it was not a small thing she was facing. None of that made what she'd done acceptable. He wasn't working toward that conclusion and hadn't been. But there was a difference. one that he'd tried to articulate to Emma, imperfectly, in a park, on a slightly wobbly swing, between understanding something and excusing it. He understood it now. That wasn't forgiveness. It was just clarity, and clarity was its own thing, useful regardless of what you decided to do with it. He pulled up to Reeves's house and Emma was already on the front porch. She had clearly been watching for his car because she was off the porch and down the driveway before he'd fully stopped, which was a habit he'd told her about 40 times, and which she apparently considered a guideline rather than a rule. He got out and she hit him at mid-torso, arms around him, face pressed into his jacket, and he wrapped his arms around her and held on. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said into his jacket. "Good morning at Reeves's?" Sophia cried because Magical Biscuit isn't a real horse, Emma said. I had to explain that imaginary horses are real in the way that matters. How did that land? She stopped crying, Emma said. So pretty good. He held her for another second. She smelled like someone else's house, different laundry detergent, someone else's breakfast. He had noticed, over 6 years, that he could always tell when she'd been somewhere else. She carried the smell of places back with her, and he always registered the moment it shifted back to home. Reeves was standing in the doorway with a coffee mug, watching. He gave Nathan a nod that meant several things simultaneously. "How'd it go? You okay? Good to see you. You don't have to talk about it." Nathan gave him a nod back that meant, "I'm okay. I'll tell you later. Thanks for taking her." They'd been communicating in shorthand for long enough that the full versions weren't necessary. "Your kid's good," Reeves said. "I know," Nathan said. "She settled a diplomatic crisis involving an imaginary horse and a 4-year-old. That's a skill set." "She comes by it honestly." Emma pulled back and looked up at him. "How was it?" she asked. He looked at her face, the gap in her teeth, the scratch still fading on her knee, the completely unself-conscious directness of the question. She wasn't asking because she'd been coached to ask. She was asking because she wanted to know and saw no reason not to. "It was real," he said. Same word he'd used with Carol. It was still the most accurate one. Emma studied him. "Did you tell her?" she asked. "About understanding?" "Yeah," he said. "I told her." "Did she get it?" He thought about Ava Sterling's face when he'd described Emma. The horse, the bear, the chapter books. The thing that had moved through her expression that she hadn't managed to keep entirely contained. "I think she's working on it," he said. Emma nodded slowly, processing this the way she processed things that were complicated, not rushing to a verdict, sitting with the information for a moment. Then she took his hand and tugged gently toward the car. "Can we get breakfast?" she said. "Not fancy, just normal." "Yeah," Nathan said. "Normal sounds good." Normal, for the next several weeks, was the work. Not the legal work. That continued in the background, Carol's steady updates arriving like dispatches from a parallel world that existed alongside the actual day-to-day. The charges progressed. Ava Sterling entered a plea arrangement in the 6th week, which Carol explained in detail and Nathan processed in summary. There would be no trial. There would be consequences. There would be conditions attached to the resolution that included a formal public acknowledgement of the assault and a period of supervised conduct. The defense contract review concluded with a formal suspension of new project approvals pending a 12-month compliance evaluation, which was not the full cancellation some people had been predicting, but was not nothing. Sterling Aerospace's board voted in the 8th week to restructure the executive leadership, which was a corporate phrase that meant Ava Sterling was no longer CEO of the company she'd built. Nathan read the news alert about that last one on a Wednesday morning while Emma was getting ready for school and immediately put his phone face down and finished making her lunch. The sandwich diagonal, not straight down the middle, because she'd told him once, just once, casually, in passing, that diagonal sandwiches tasted better, and he'd done it that way ever since without ever mentioning that he remembered. He thought about what it must have felt like for Ava Sterling to walk out of the building she'd built. He thought about this with more empathy than he'd have predicted, and he thought the empathy was okay to have, and he thought he didn't have to do anything with it. Emma came out of her room with her backpack on the wrong shoulder again. "Other shoulder," he said. "This one's more comfortable. That one will hurt your back eventually." Eventually is a long time away. "Emma," She switched it. She did this. The token resistance, the immediate compliance. And he'd realized sometime around her 5th birthday that the token resistance was not actually about the shoulder, but about the principle, about being the kind of person who doesn't simply accept instructions without at least brief consideration. He'd decided he was okay with that. The world needed people who gave instructions brief consideration. "Ready?" he said. "Almost." She went back to her room, returned with the stuffed bear, looked at him, apparently reconsidered, put the bear back. Came out again. "Now ready." He drove her to school. At the drop-off lane, she climbed out, heaved her backpack up, turned back once. The unself-conscious wave, the half-somewhere-else look, the face already moving toward whatever the morning held. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Tonight can we look at dogs? Not to get one, just to look." He had been expecting this. He'd been expecting it for several weeks, actually, and had been quietly doing research of his own, because the prospect of Emma Cole looking at dogs online and falling immediately in love with a specific one and then being told no was a scenario he needed to be prepared for. "Yeah," he said. "We can look." Emma's face did the full light thing. Then she was through the doors. But the package arrived on a Tuesday in December, 4 months after the morning in the cafe. Nathan almost missed it. He'd gotten home late from a job. He'd gone back to work 2 months earlier, freelance security consulting, the kind of work that used enough of what he knew to be useful without requiring him to be gone for weeks at a time. Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework with a focused intensity that suggested she'd eaten the afternoon snack already and was now running on pure agenda. The package was on the doorstep, smallish, wrapped in plain brown paper, his name and address handwritten in careful block letters with an Austin return address he didn't recognize. He carried it inside and set it on the counter. Emma looked up. "What's that?" "I don't know yet." She went back to her homework, which was a worksheet about multiplication facts that she clearly found inadequate as an intellectual challenge and was completing with the speed of someone who wants to be done with the prerequisite. Nathan opened the package at the kitchen counter. Inside the brown paper was a cardboard box, and inside the cardboard box, wrapped in tissue paper, was a ceramic mug. It was white, hand-painted, with small blue butterflies along the base, the wings detailed in the particular careful way that suggested someone had taken time with them. Not mass-produced, not a gift shop thing, something someone had chosen or made with specific intention. He turned it over. On the bottom, a small paper label from a local Austin pottery studio. He looked in the box for a note. It was tucked under the tissue paper, a small envelope, and inside the envelope a single card in the same careful block handwriting as the address. "Nathan, cups can be replaced. Childhood cannot. I don't expect anything from you for this. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that those words, the ones you said about Emma in the conference room, they didn't leave me alone. They're still not leaving me alone. I think that's probably the point. She sounds like someone worth protecting. So do you. Ava Sterling." Nathan stood at the kitchen counter and read the note twice. He looked at the mug, the blue butterflies, the careful wings. He was still looking at it when Emma appeared at his elbow with the quiet materialization that she'd perfected recently, the ability to move from one room to another without announcing it, which he'd decided was either a personality trait or something she'd learned from watching him and which he wasn't entirely sure how to feel about. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the mug. She took it in both hands, turning it carefully, looking at the butterflies with the focused attention she gave things she found genuinely interesting. "It's pretty," she said. "Yeah." "Who's it from?" He thought about how to answer this. He'd been trying for 4 months to give Emma honest answers to complicated questions without giving her more than she needed at her age, which was a balance he was not always good at. He thought about the conference room and the park and the swing and all the conversations they'd had in the months since a Tuesday morning in October when she'd stood in a cafe and told a grown woman twice what had actually happened. "From the cafe lady," he said. Emma looked at the mug. She looked at it for a long time, the way she looked at things when she was doing more than looking. "She made it?" Emma asked. "I think she bought it, from someone who made it." Emma tilted the mug, watching the light move across the butterflies. "Why butterflies?" "I don't know. Nathan said. Maybe she just liked them. Emma set the mug carefully on the counter. She looked at the note, which Nathan was still holding. Can I read it? He handed it to her. She read it with the careful attention of a child who has recently learned that reading is a skill worth using on real things, not just library books. She read it twice, which he noticed, and then she handed it back. She thinks I'm worth protecting, Emma said. Yeah, she does. You said that too, in the cafe. I did. Emma looked at the mug for another moment. Do you think she changed? She asked. It was the question he'd been carrying since December. Since before December, since the conference room and Marcus's phone call and James Whitfield's awkward apology from a board member who didn't know what else to offer. He'd been turning it over for months, looking at it from different angles, the way you look at something in low light, trying to find the angle where it resolves into clarity. He thought about who he'd been at 32, a year after losing Sarah. He thought about the things he'd done right and the things he'd done badly, and the long, unglamorous work of becoming someone his daughter wasn't afraid of. He thought about how that work was still not finished and probably never would be, because that was not how people worked. People were not projects with completion dates. I think she's learning, he said. That's different from changed. Change sounds like it's done. Learning means it's still happening. He paused. The note sounds real to me, but I can't know for sure. Nobody can know that from the outside. Emma considered this. Bear changed his vote, she said, and then he went back to being scared of dogs when we actually looked at them online. Nathan blinked. He did? A little, Emma said, but he's still trying. She looked at the mug. Maybe that's what it is. Still trying. Nathan looked at his daughter. She had said, without knowing she was saying it, the most precise thing that had been said about any of this in 4 months. Yeah, he said. Maybe that's exactly what it is. He put the mug in this cabinet with the other mugs, not displayed, not hidden, just present, in the ordinary rotation of things that get used and washed and used again. He used it for the first time 3 days later without particularly planning to, reaching for it on a Thursday morning when he was tired and not paying close attention to which mug he grabbed. And he noticed when he sat down with it, and he sat with that for a moment, and then he drank his coffee. He wrote back to Ava Sterling, eventually. Not immediately. It took him 2 weeks to decide what he wanted to say, and then another week to actually sit down and write it. He wrote it by hand, which felt right in a way he couldn't fully explain, on a piece of plain notepaper at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon while Emma was in her room engaged in what she'd described as an important creative project that she wasn't ready to share yet. He kept it short. He said that he'd received the package and the note, that both were received in the spirit he thought they were sent, and that he hoped she was doing the work she needed to do. Not for him, not for the legal record, but for herself, because that was the only version of it that would actually last. He said that Emma was doing well. He said she was reading chapter books now, real ones, and that she'd recently become a credentialed expert in imaginary horse naming, and that her stuffed bear had been voting on important household decisions with increasing confidence. He wrote, I don't know what accountability looks like on the other side of something like this. I've had to figure out versions of it myself, for different things. What I know is that the weight of it doesn't go away, but you learn to carry it differently. That's not a small thing. It's actually most of the thing. He signed it with his name, sealed the envelope, left it on the counter. He mailed it on Monday. Bus. January came with the cold front that Austin always seems slightly unprepared for, the kind of weather that the city experiences as a novelty rather than a routine. Emma had strong opinions about cold weather, specifically that the purple jacket was sufficient for any temperature, which was demonstrably false and which Nathan had stopped arguing about in favor of quietly ensuring she wore layers underneath it. The dog question had moved from theoretical to specific. Her name, according to Emma, was Potato. She was a 3-year-old beagle mix from a rescue organization in South Austin, and Emma had identified her on a Tuesday night in December during what was supposed to be a casual browsing session and had been, in practice, a decisive moment from which there was no returning. Potato had large ears that didn't quite match her head and a way of sitting that suggested she was thinking about something complicated, and Emma had looked at her photo for approximately 45 seconds and announced that they had found her. Nathan had taken 4 weeks to agree, not because he was opposed, but because he needed to be sure he was ready for the actual daily logistics of a dog, which were not theoretical. He talked to the rescue organization, arranged a meet, watched Emma sit on the floor of the meat room while Potato walked in careful circles around her, and eventually settled her large-eared head in Emma's lap with the precision of an animal that has made a decision. Bear, Emma had reported afterward, had voted yes. Potato came home on a Saturday in mid-January in the back seat of Nathan's car with Emma beside her, and the first 48 hours were chaotic in the specific way that adding a living creature to a household is always chaotic, which is to say, nothing went wrong exactly, but everything was different in ways that required constant adjustment. Potato had opinions about where she slept, which did not initially align with where Nathan had decided she should sleep, and this had required negotiation. She had a habit of sitting very close to people's feet, which Nathan kept nearly tripping over until he recalibrated the awareness of his lower periphery. She was afraid of the refrigerator, specifically the ice maker, which made a sound she found objectionable. Emma handled all of this with the calm competence of someone who had been preparing for this exact responsibility for months and was now deploying the preparation. She'd made a schedule. She'd researched feeding guidelines. She'd explained to Potato, on the first night, that the ice maker was not a threat, which did not immediately convince Potato, but which Emma delivered with such patient authority that Nathan had to leave the room to avoid laughing. On the third evening, Potato climbed up onto the couch beside Nathan, which was also a negotiated zone, because Nathan had initially said no dogs on the furniture and had held that position for approximately 36 hours, and settled against his leg with a sigh of such complete satisfaction that it was almost comic. Emma appeared from the kitchen eating an apple and stopped in the doorway. "She likes you," Emma said. "Apparently." "She has good judgment," Emma said, with the tone of someone paying a compliment to both parties simultaneously. Nathan looked at the dog against his leg. He looked at his daughter in the doorway. The apartment was warm, and Potato was heavier than she looked, and Emma had icing on her sleeve from something she'd baked earlier that afternoon, with a recipe she'd found herself and executed mostly independently, only calling for help when the measurements got complicated. He thought about a Tuesday morning in October, the light through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the particular gold of it on his daughter's hair. He thought about how a morning that had contained something genuinely terrible had also, in the months that followed, contained a lot of other things. His mother's voice on the phone, Reeves's shorthand nods, Carol's contained laugh, Marcus's frank and soldierly honesty, Calloway's careful promise, a board member's awkward call, a detective who listened without hurrying, a conference room with plastic water bottles, and a woman standing at a table with her hands at her sides, running out of the speed she'd used for years to outrun herself. And Emma. Always Emma. Emma asking if he was sad, Emma holding the mug carefully in both hands, Emma explaining to a 4-year-old that imaginary horses are real in the ways that matter, Emma on the swing going higher than she probably should, Emma saying still trying like it was the most obvious and adequate thing in the world, because to her it was. He had spent 3 years, since losing Sarah, trying to figure out what kind of father to be. Not the abstract kind of father. He'd known from the moment Emma was born what he'd do for her, what he'd give up for her, what the scale of it was. That part was never unclear. What was unclear was the texture of it, the daily specific version. Whether he was doing right by her in the small moments, the ordinary Tuesday mornings, the diagonal sandwiches, and the slightly wobbly swings, and the negotiated furniture policies, and the conversations about complicated things that deserved honest answers. He still didn't know entirely. He didn't think you ever fully knew. But he looked at the kid in the doorway eating an apple, who had stood in a cafe at 6 years old and told a grown woman twice that something had happened, who had processed a frightening morning by running democratic proceedings among stuffed animals, who had asked him in the car if he was going to be okay with the directness of someone who wanted a real answer, who had understood, without anyone teaching her exactly this, that still trying was different from finished and that the difference mattered. He thought, she's going to be okay. Whatever comes, she's going to be okay. He thought, I think I might be too. These were not grand conclusions, They didn't resolve everything or explain everything or close every door that had been opened by a morning in October. They were just what was true on a January evening in a second-floor apartment with a beagle mix on the couch and a kid in the doorway and the slow, ordinary continuation of a life. "Homework?" he said. Emma finished the apple. "Done," she said. "Reading?" "Done." "The thing with the fractions?" She made the face she made when she'd been hoping he'd forget about the fractions. "Almost done," she said. "Emma, it's almost done in the sense that I know what page it's on," she said. "Go," he said. She went, with the dignity of someone who lost a negotiation but is choosing to treat it as a strategic retreat. He heard her bedroom door, heard her settle, heard the familiar sound of pencil on paper that meant she was actually doing it. Potato sighed again, more deeply, and rearranged herself so her head was across his knee. Nathan put his hand on the dog's flank, felt the steady breathing of her. Outside, January Austin was dark and cold by 6, the kind of cold that made the apartment feel more solid, more itself. He could see from the couch the mug on the shelf in the cabinet, the one with the blue butterflies, visible through the glass cabinet door, the wings catching the kitchen light. He thought about the note. Cups can be replaced. Childhood cannot. He thought about what it had taken for someone to write that. Not the words themselves. The words were simple. What it had taken was the willingness to sit still long enough to mean them, to stop moving fast enough to see the thing they were looking at. He didn't know Ava Sterling's full story, didn't know what had built the person who'd walked into a cafe on a Tuesday morning and chosen, at every decision point, the worst possible version of herself. He suspected it wasn't simple. It never was. People who treat other people as obstacles usually got there by some road, and the road is usually harder to look at than the destination. What he knew was that she was looking at it now. What he knew was that looking at it was not small and not easy, and not something he could do for her. What he also knew, and this was the part he hadn't said to Emma, hadn't said to anyone because it was the kind of knowing that lives below words, was that the morning in the cafe had not only been about Ava Sterling. It had been about him too, about what he'd chosen to do in it, about standing between his daughter and something that scared her and not letting it show, not because he was performing composure, but because composure was the only useful thing he had to offer in that moment, about asking for an apology quietly, once, then once more, and meaning it both times, about absorbing a slap in front of his child and letting her see that absorbing it was possible, that it didn't have to become something larger, that the person who hits isn't always the one with the power. He hadn't planned to teach her any of that. He'd just done the thing that was in front of him. But she'd been watching, the way she always watched, filing things away the way he filed things away. And he thought maybe that was how it worked. You didn't teach your children by the things you told them. You taught them by the things you did when you thought no one important was looking, not knowing they were always looking, not knowing they were taking notes. He heard Emma's pencil stop, then start again. He heard Potato's slow breathing. He sat in the apartment on a January evening and let the quiet be quiet. In the months that followed, things settled into the shapes they were going to take. The legal case concluded in February. The plea arrangement finalized with conditions that Carol explained Nathan didn't need to do anything about or for. Ava Sterling completed her required public acknowledgement of the assault, a brief, direct statement that did not use the word regret without specifying what for, which Nathan noticed and which he thought meant someone had written it honestly. He read it once, on his phone, standing in the parking lot of Emma's school while waiting for pickup. He put his phone in his pocket when he was done. He'd received, in the weeks before the conclusion, a second letter from Ava Sterling. Longer this time, less careful, the block handwriting a little less precise at the edges, like she'd written it faster or, at a time when the control she was used to applying wasn't fully available. She talked about what she was doing, an organization she was starting, or trying to start, supporting veterans and their families, specifically focused on transition and mental health resources in the first years after service. She said she'd talked to Marcus Webb about it. She said Marcus had told her exactly which parts of her initial plan were wrong, and why. With the directness she'd apparently decided she preferred to the alternatives. She said she didn't know if it was enough. She said she didn't think the question was whether it was enough exactly. She thought the question was whether she was going to do it anyway. Nathan read it twice. He didn't write back immediately. He thought about it for a week. He wrote back, "The organization sounds real. Do the work, and don't spend too much time deciding whether it's enough. Enough is for other people to determine. Your job is the work." He meant it. He sent it. In March, Reeves asked Nathan if he'd consider consulting on a new veteran transition program being developed by a nonprofit he was connected to. It wasn't a full-time position. It was the kind of thing that required several days a month and the specific knowledge of someone who had navigated the transition himself and understood both the external landscape and the internal one. Nathan said yes without having to think very hard about it, because saying yes to things that used what he knew for something that actually helped people was one of the frameworks he'd built in the years since leaving the service, and it still held. Emma started second grade in September, which came with a new teacher and a classroom across the hall from Mia's classroom, which Emma described as suboptimal but manageable. She'd moved on from chapter books to something longer, a series about a girl who discovers she can talk to animals, which she'd told Nathan was realistic in its emotional content, even if certain other elements required suspension of disbelief. She'd said suspension of disbelief with the comfort of someone who'd encountered the phrase and found it immediately useful, and Nathan had had to do the thing where you look at something nearby and keep your face still. Magical Biscuit now had a full name, a backstory, and an extended imaginary family. Bear had voted against the backstory initially and then changed his vote when Emma presented additional context, which Emma reported with the satisfied tone of someone who believes that exposure to evidence should change minds. Potato, at 11 months in the Cole household, had resolved her conflict with the ice maker. Not overcome it, exactly. She still gave the refrigerator a specific look when the ice maker activated, a look of resigned disapproval. But she no longer fled the kitchen, which Emma described as significant growth. It was April when they went to the park. Not the one with the wobbly swings, those had been fixed over the winter, which was welcome, but it also briefly shifted some nostalgic quality Emma seemed to have assigned to their wobble. But the bigger one on the south side, the one with the hill and the oak trees and the long view of the Austin skyline that was visible when the weather was clear. The weather was clear. Emma ran ahead up the hill with Potato, who had a leash but had opinions about the pace of it, and Nathan walked behind at a pace that was both slower and also involved keeping track of where both of them were without appearing to, which was a skill he'd developed into something near automatic. He had his jacket, and she had her purple jacket, which was the same one, still not washed. The good luck apparently still intact. At the top of the hill, Emma threw herself down in the grass with the complete physical commitment that children bring to grass sitting, which involves no preliminary positioning or hesitation, just full contact with the ground. Potato flopped beside her with similar commitment. Nathan sat with rather more deliberation, because the plate in his shoulder made certain positions require planning, which he never mentioned to Emma and which she'd never asked about, though he sometimes thought she'd noticed and was choosing not to ask. The skyline was there, the way it always was, indifferent and familiar. Emma put her arms behind her head and looked at the sky, which was the particular clear blue of an April afternoon that hasn't decided to do anything complicated. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. Do you think about that lady? Still?" He considered whether to deflect and decided not to. "Sometimes," he said. "Less than I used to." Emma thought about this. "I don't think about her much," she said. "Mostly I think about the cafe, the one with the swirls on top. The cinnamon roll." "It was really good," Emma said, "even though the morning was bad." "Yeah," Nathan said. "It was." Emma rolled onto her side and looked at him. Potato took this as an opportunity to put her head across Emma's legs, which Emma allowed without interrupting her thought. "Do you think good mornings and bad mornings can be the same morning?" Emma asked. He looked at his daughter. In the April light, with Potato across her legs and the Austin skyline behind her and the purple jacket she'd never let him wash, she looked like herself, which was not a small thing, being fully oneself at 7, before the world has had many chances to suggest alternatives. "Yeah," he said. "I think that's actually most mornings, if you look at them closely enough." Emma considered this. "Okay," she said. "That's kind of good." "Yeah," he said. It is. She went back to looking at the sky. He looked at the skyline for a while, and then at his daughter, and then at the skyline again. Potato snored faintly, which was something she did that Emma found hilarious, and Nathan found oddly companionable. He thought about what he knew, after all of it, that he hadn't known before. Not new information exactly, not revelation, just things that had been visible and become more visible, the way certain stars become visible when you've been in the dark long enough. He knew that dignity was not the same as passivity, that you could stand completely still in the middle of something and be the most active person in the room, that the choice not to escalate is still a choice, still requires something from you, and that making it in front of your child is one of the most useful things you can do, because she is watching and she is filing it away, and she will use it someday in a situation you'll never see, and what she does in that situation will be partly yours. He knew that accountability, real accountability, was not the public version of it, not the arrest in the boardroom or the news alerts or the stock prices shifting. Those were consequences, and consequences mattered, but they weren't the same thing as understanding. Understanding was what happened in the quiet, in the conference room, in the letter, in the ongoing daily work of someone choosing to look at what they'd been running from. He didn't know how it was going for Ava Sterling, not really, because that kind of work is not visible from the outside. He hoped it was going. He thought maybe it was. He knew that the things that hold, the things that actually last in a life, are not the dramatic moments, the confrontations, the turning points that feel like narrative. They're the diagonal sandwiches, the mug used on a Thursday morning without planning to, the sound of a pencil on paper through a bedroom door, a dog snoring in the grass, a kid looking at the sky and asking whether good mornings and bad mornings can be the same morning, which they can. He knew that he had not done any of this perfectly. He'd been tired and sharp some mornings when he should have been patient. He'd over-explained things and under-explained others. He'd burned the grilled cheese. He'd let Emma carry her backpack wrong 41 times. He was working on things, the same way he was always working on things, the same way everyone is always working on things if they're paying any attention at all. That was not failure. That was just the condition of being a person, which does not come with a completed version. Emma sat up. She looked at the skyline, then at him. "Can we go get something to eat?" she said. "I'm hungry." "What do you want?" She thought about it. "Something normal," she said, "but maybe also something good." He got up, helped her up, let Potato get up on her own schedule, which took a moment because Potato had been comfortable and was making her feelings about the transition known. "Normal and good at the same time?" Nathan said. Emma took his hand, the same unself-conscious way she had since she could reach it. "You said good mornings and bad mornings can be the same morning," she said. "Normal and good is easier than that." Nathan looked at her. He thought, there it is. He thought, that's the whole thing, right there. "Yeah," he said. "You're right, that's easier." They walked down the hill, the three of them, in the April afternoon that was doing nothing complicated, into the rest of a day that was neither finished nor broken, just continuing, which was more than enough.